Now, Oregon loves its beer and wine. I mean, we celebrate that, don't we? If you look at those lists, you Google like best beer cities in America, you look those lists up, we're typically one of the only states that's on there twice because we have Portland and Bend. As far as our wine is considered, ooh la la, some of our grapes rival France. I know we are proud of this. We brag about it, which is like one of my favorite types of brags. It reminds me of the guy who uses the word we when talking about his favorite sports team. Like, I think we have a pretty good shot this year. You don't play for the team. But I'm curious, how often does that pride for our beer and wine scene consider the whole equation? Like the fact that Oregon also ranks near the bottom of the list for substance abuse and resources to treat alcoholism. It's a strange fact when you look at them side by side. We love our alcohol, but not our alcoholics. And it brings us to another edition of Vice News. Where to start? Where to start on this? First, let's look at the numbers. All right, Eco Northwest analyzed the year of 2019 and presented this report in January of this year. They think that the total cost of excessive drinking cost Oregonians $4.8 billion in 2018. $2 billion in lost earning for businesses, $1 billion for things like car crashes and court cases and stuff like that, $700 million for health care, and $600 million for treatment and social work. Now, data is interesting. And data like that can be a little bit confusing to hear because it's not like the state would be $5 billion richer if alcohol vanished tonight. But and I'm not downplaying the suffering caused by excessive drinking, but with dollars and cents, if you just want to look at the numbers, businesses do find ways to make up costs. Doctors and lawyers get paid for saving a life or getting justice for a victim of a DUI crash. And social work is an admirable profession, and people pay their bills with the money they make, helping someone get their life back together. But alcohol, of course, can create massive amounts of suffering, and that $4.8 billion is an attempt to quantify it. I look for some data on the amount of money the beer and wine industry generates in the state. I found this report from the Oregon Wine Board. It's from 2013, so nearly 10 years ago. And they estimated at the time that the wine industry alone contributed $3.3 billion in economic activity to the state. Again, these numbers have a lot of moving parts, and that means they can be manipulated, which is exactly how I kind of feel trying to learn anything from the two sides fighting over this bill, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But first, let's talk about the bill. It started as a massive tax increase since Oregon has really low taxes for beer, cider, and wine. And when I say massive, I mean massive, nearly 3,000%. The tax on a barrel of beer would have gone from $2.60 to $72.60. The tax on a barrel of wine would have gone from 65 cents to $10.65. Beer and wine sellers would have gone from some of the lowest taxes in the country to some of the highest overnight. And people freaked out. They threw a fit about this, and the bill fell apart because of that. But it didn't go away completely. Instead, lawmakers came up with a new bill that would fund a task force to reduce alcohol consumption by 15%, which will almost certainly swing the conversation back to higher taxes. Here's how one of the lead proponents of the bill explained it to us.
Honestly, we don't even want the alcohol industry to pay it. We want them to pass it on to the consumer because we want the consumer to begin to reduce the level of beer that they're consuming, the wine or alcohol, but namely in key categories of underage drinkers and binge drinkers. The craft industry, if you Google pricing craft beer, what you'll find from their own industry is that most people that buy craft beer don't care about the price. And the original legislation we had would have only raised the price of a bottle of beer by 21 cents. Now, they told you that it's a 2,800% increase. They're trying to tax us out of business. Well, 2,800% of virtually nothing is virtually nothing.
Remember how I said I felt just a smidge manipulated? Here's why. So the way he explained that it would only be a 21-cent increase on a bottle of beer. What's the big deal? Except that's how a sales tax works. A sales tax gets tacked on at the end, and you, the consumer, the person buying the thing, pays all of it. This tax is not a sales tax. It would start at the top of the food chain. So the idea that the alcohol industry wouldn't pay for it as the costs there kind of trickle down, it's a strange argument. Also, the statement that craft beer drinkers don't care about how much their beer costs, I don't know who they're interviewing. I know some craft beer drinkers, and they do care. Lastly, to call a tax hike that would amount to one of the highest in the country as virtually nothing seems a little disingenuous. But that's politics, I guess. And I got a heavy spoonful of it from the other side, too.
So statistics can be tricky when a lot of different statistics are being thrown around. But if you look at some of them about in terms of alcohol addiction and where Oregon sits nationally as one of the worst states, and then treatment options where Oregon sits with one of the states with the fewest options, and then you consider that the people who pay taxes to beer and wine in this state pay some of the lowest in the nation. Do you think it's reasonable that beer and wine should be taxed at a higher rate than it is right now in order to help balance out those other two factors?
For now and for the foreseeable future, we are at a hard no on tax increases for the reasons that I stated. You know, these are local small business owners. There are other avenues to bring funding into the state. We have not been brought to the table. No one from the alcohol industry has been invited to this conversation to figure out opportunities for finding the funds. Instead of villainizing our industry, which creates jobs, which helps support families that own these businesses.
Sure. But you say, let's come to the table. And I said, well, should there be any increase in tax? And you're like, that's a hard no. That seems like a tough position to start a conversation around a table with a hard no.
Well, if we'd been brought to the table originally, perhaps it wouldn't be a hard no. But as on tax increase, it is absolutely a hard no, at least right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic.
So right now, this bill is in the House Behavioral Health Committee. There's a work session scheduled for Wednesday where lawmakers could vote to send it to the Senate. We're going to keep you posted on what happens.